దూరవిద్యా విధానంలో డాక్టర్ బిఆర్ అంబేద్కర్ ఓపెన్ యూనివర్సిటీ దేశంలోనే మొట్టమొదటి సార్వత్రిక విశ్వవిద్యాలయం. దాదాపు 2.5 దశాబ్దాలుగా దూరవిద్యా విధానం ద్వారా కంప్యూటర్ కోర్సును అనుసంధానం చేస్తూ BA, BCom, BSc డిగ్రీ కోర్సులను అందిస్తోంది. పోస్ట్ గ్రాడ్యుయేషన్ స్థాయి, డిగ్రీ, డిప్లొమా స్థాయి కోర్సులను ఔత్సాహికులైన విద్యార్థులకు అందిస్తోంది. డెవలప్మెంట్ స్టడీస్లో సెంటర్ ఫర్ ఎకనామిక్స్ అండ్ సోషల్ స్టడీస్ ద్వారా MPhil, PhDతో పాటు విశ్వవిద్యాలయమే స్వయంగా దూర విద్యా విధాన అంశంపైన PhD వంటి పరిశోధన కోర్సులు ప్రవేశపెట్టింది. సుమారు 4.5 లక్షల మంది విద్యార్థులు ఈ విశ్వవిద్యాలయం నుంచి ఉన్నత విద్యావకాశాలు పొందుతున్నారు. డాక్టర్ బిఆర్ అంబేద్కర్ సార్వత్రిక విశ్వవిద్యాలయం స్థానికంగా స్వయం బోధనా పద్ధతిలో ముద్రణ రూపంలో రూపొందించిన కోర్స్ మెటీరియల్ అందిస్తోంది. కోర్స్ మెటీరియల్ అధ్యయనానికి సహకరించే విధంగా రేడియో, టెలివిజన్ పాఠ్యాంశాల ఆధారంగా కార్యక్రమాలు ప్రసారం చేస్తోంది. అధ్యయన కేంద్రాల ద్వారా ఏర్పాటు చేసే సలహా సంసర్గ తరగతులు, సైన్స్ ప్రాక్టికల్ సౌకర్యాలు విద్యార్థులకు స్వయం అధ్యయనానికి ఒక చక్కటి అవకాశం. ఇవి విద్యార్థి సమీపంలో ఉండే అధ్యయన కేంద్రం నుంచే పొందొచ్చు.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University Teleconference. Today we discuss MA Final Year Literature course titled Indian Writing in English, Some Women Writers. We request the students to participate in the discussion. Please do call us on these telephone numbers 040 270 31431. 040 270 31432, 040 270 31433. We invite eminent resource person from Hyderabad Central University, Prof.M.Sridhar, retired from Department of English, University of Hyderabad. We welcome you, sir. Ms. Vidya Vakulabharanam from University of Hyderabad. We welcome you to the teleconference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Today the topic is Indian writing in English, some women writers. Prominent women writers like Toru Dutt, Sarojini Naidu, Kamala Das, Nayanthara Sehgal, Arundhati Roy, Anita Desai, Shashi Deshpande, Mahashweta Devi, very recently Chitra Divakaruni, including Kiran Desai. I quote, "I don't want to make someone else, I want to make myself," unquote. This is the protagonist of Toni Morrison's second novel, Sula, says this. Search for an identity, search for self, the pain, the agony, the suffering, the body and the experiences of the women are the main themes in some of the writers, women writers. Here, Indian women's writing is characterized by 3 main characters: individualism, patriarchy and gender identity. The themes are invariably political because they deal with unequal power relations, social norms and traditions that restrain women from the mainstream. Here, today we are going to discuss some writers prominently: Toru Dutt, Ismat Chughtai, Kamala Das, taking their works and giving some insights about their observations, their experiences in different genres. Professor Sridhar, can you give some details about women's text addresses the women's question? How the women texts address the women's question? Professor Sridhar.
The texts that we are dealing with today are Torudutt's poems that you have read, and then Krupabai Satyanathan's Saguna, Ismat Chughtai's short story Lihaf, and finally we have Kamala Das's My Story. Now, these are some of the lessons that you have read as part of your course. Now, how do we look at these writers as Indian writers, and how do we look at them as women writers? That is the question that we begin with. Now, the fact that these writers that we are looking at are from the first two blocks of your lessons also tells us that these are early women, Indian women writers, and the first two of them have lived and wrote their works in the late 19th century, and then you have Ismat Chugtai and Kamala Das, who have written in the early part of the 20th century. Now, these writers have written all their writings, especially the first two writers. They have started writing at a time when the woman question, what is called the woman question, was very prominent. Now, placed as they were at a time when women had started educating themselves, and they write, I mean, for example, autobiography is one of the genres in which they write. Saguna, for example, is partly autobiographical, and it is also a genre. Now, Torudutt has written autobiographical writings, letters, and she has also written poems, as the poems that you are reading. And I am sure Vidya will have something to say about these writers, and then we will take.
Yeah, Torudutt has written letters, and she has written poems, and she has also written a novel, Bianca, in French, which is not complete as such. And she has actually tried out many genres. Okay. And she has contributed to the Calcutta Review and written some essays on different issues of the time. And she has only lived for 21 years. Looking at that, I mean, she has done a lot of writing.
Short span.
Right.
In that
yes,
short span.
Short span.
And both these writers, Satyanathan and Torudutt, Krupabai Satyanathan and Torudutt, were not alive in the 20th century.
Yes.
You know, these are specifically the 19th century early women writers in English, who have written both in English, and Toru has written in French. So, you have these writers contributing to Indian writing in English, in quotes, which probably Professor Sridhar will talk about later.
Yeah.
And it is very important to look at them and look at the other two writers who belonged in the 20th century.
Yes.
Probably there is a shift from the 19th to the 20th, shift in the themes and shift in so many things they were doing, you know, that experimenting. So, we were probably talking about the nation at that time.
Yes.
So, what kind of role do these women writers play in the building of the nation becomes very important. But before that, Professor Sridhar, can you tell us something about why were these called, why were these people called women writers? We are talking about Indian writers, and specifically the category of women writers. Does that mean something, that women writers label?
Yeah. These writers are primarily writing as women. For example, let's take Torudutt. The two poems that you are reading in the course are But Two, and Sita. Now, though Battu is about Ekalavya, the other poem Sita is about a woman writer. Now, when you look at Battu as an example of a piece written by a woman, now she is writing a story, or rather she is retelling or rewriting the story of Ekalavya. And all of us are aware that in terms of social acceptability, in terms of not being getting the same space as men, women have things which are in common with Dalits who are also experience similar kind of discrimination. Now, it is that which perhaps allows somebody like Torudat to choose to write about Ekalavya and about Sita. And perhaps Vidya can say something about Sita, and then maybe I can say something about Battu.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, as far as Sita is concerned, these two poems are from ancient ballads, right?
And legends
of Hindustan. And Toru has, in her later years, the last 2-3 years, probably between 1873 and 1877, before her death, she chose to learn Sanskrit, which is another language, and then she chose to read in Sanskrit and also probably wanted to write in Sanskrit. We don't know.
So that makes her almost as trilingual
writer. Not writer, but the person who is dealing with literature. So, when she was reading all these things, probably she was inspired, and it's not just about writing about certain characters, but this means that she was also dealing with belonging, the sense of belonging, whether she belonged in India, whether she belonged in France, or she belonged in England. And these early writers were trying to find their identity probably.
Yes.
Identity of the self, and as identity as in relation to the country they were brought up in, or they were born in, or they were going to belong in future. So, I think this is a very difficult and very complicated times they were living in. And so, when Torudat speaks about Sita, when she writes about Sita, she is not in this sonnet. It's a sonnet, sir, right? 14 lines. So, she is not talking about the story of Sita as such, because we all know the story of Sita. That's probably the assumption. So, she is talking about her mother who sang to her the story, this story of Sita. That singing, a lullaby, something that comes from the mother to the daughter, mother to the child. Because there are 3 children here, Toru and her sister and her brother, who are listening to the mother singing this lullaby to them when they're very, very young. And
but she's writing the story which is written by Ramayana, Valmiki.
She is writing the story which is written by a male, and she keeps that male writer on one side. And then she doesn't talk about Rama as Valmiki has spoken about Rama. She talks about Sita.
So the emphasis is
on Sita. So the story of Sita as sung by the mother, as being rewritten by the daughter later. Not when she is a kid, but when she grows up into a young woman. So there's the story from one woman to another woman, a legacy that's being taken from the women, which we do not find when we are talking about the women's writing. So where do you take your writings from? Where do you take your inspiration from? You didn't have that kind of women who were providing you that inspiration. So you had all male writers who have written, and then there's a lot of corpus of that kind of literature which belong to male writing.
I just want to add up here, when you speak about the search for an identity, how do you feel that the Sita, the 14-line sonnet, how it is representing that the identity crisis, how it is addressing the identity crisis? Is there any point that you can we can see in that Sita, the 14-line sonnet?
See, either you look at it as a crisis,
or
you look at it as assertion. there could be the crisis and so the assertion, right? That's what we are talking about. That's
Yes.
what Professor
Yes.
Sridhar mentioned about when he spoke about the autobiographies or women writing themselves or women writing the nation or you know, this women's writing as such.
As such, itself. Yeah.
So when she is talking about Sita, she is already talking about herself as a writer. She is already talking about her woman who has sung that you know, song to her. So she is mentioning the you know, the mythologies or the epics that belong to India, and she is talking about her mother, oral literature that is passed on to them. So she is
Generations,
already projecting herself as somebody.
So there is an
As
assertion.
somebody.
Yeah, somebody. There is an assertion in a.
So she doesn't talk
Yeah.
about any crisis, even though that crisis is probably behind all her writing. Because when you
Okay.
look at her letters,
Yeah.
so as we were talking about
Yes,
it,
yes.
when you look at her letter, she says she is all the time anxious about how her writings are going to be received by the men who read these things.
Okay. Yeah. So the readership is
The readership is very
predominantly.
important. Yeah, there were not too many
Dominating
women
men.
who
Yeah.
were reading English, or
Correct.
so the men were going to read these things, and how are they going to receive it? So when in one of the
Do you
letters
think like
to-
here she is very particular about the readers also, rather than I mean the target audience, like the men will read. Are they keeping that
She
view
is.
inside and she is writing?
She is in one of the letters to Miss Martin, you know, her
Okay.
friend in England. She mentions something that she had written to the Bengal magazine. She says the Calcutta Review. She says when they read this and said, you know, the person who has written it, he is a really good writer. He is a really good writer. They didn't know whether it was a woman or a man, you know, who had written this. A
But
mistaken
there
identity.
It's already he there.
A mistaken
That's an
identity, because somebody
Okay.
who writes well is a he.
Yes,
anyway.
yeah.
Who gets published is a he.
Correct.
That's a taken
So,
notion.
So she tells Miss Martin, I was very happy, you know,
when they said it is
because
he.
my writing is accepted first of all.
Okay.
Correct.
You look at the anxiety in women who were writing for
And
for certain readers.
yes.
Okay. So you can't say there wasn't the identity crisis, but at the same time they were not talking about the crisis, but they were writing so that they're accepted. So
Yes.
we talk about the crisis. Probably
Yes,
they faced
yes.
it.
Yeah.
And it comes out in the personal writings,
Yeah.
like her letters.
Yeah. Maybe
yeah, Sridhar sir, the next character we are speaking
yeah.
about.
I thought we could say something about Battu.
Yes.
Now the poem Battu is about Ekalavya, and the poem begins like this: My name is Battu, said the youth, a hunter's son, I know not fear. Now the way she introduces Ekalavya as a hunter's son, and it's followed by I know not fear. So here is an Ekalavya who comes across to us as somebody who has a lot of self-respect, who is able to assert himself. Now that is where the identity of the Dalit Ekalavya and the identity of a woman who is also trying to assert herself come together in a poem which is to celebrate the identity, the questions of identity that Toru Dutt is trying to address in her poems. Now another thing that we see in Toru Dutt is the whole question of Christianity. Now I am sure we could say something about Christianity as
With
well,
the question of
and the whole question of conversion.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah, as far as the conversion is concerned, I'll start with this thing that Toru Dutt's family, the entire family itself, you know, it's the extended family also, all of them converted to Christianity.
yes.
So it was like not one person or two people or three people, but the entire Dutt family. As we know them in the Dutt family album, which
Yes,
is
yes.
a very famous one.
Mhm.
So the you know, Toru Dutt belongs to that second generation of converts as such. She is not the first generation person, and there is a lot of confidence in these people when they got English educated that way, and also went out of India to France and England and got educated and stayed there and came back to India. They didn't come back to India because they wanted to settle in India. They came back to India because they were going through illnesses. Aru had tuberculosis, and probably Toru also had that infection, the beginning of that infection. So Aru's doctor tells you know, their father that they have to go back to India and then you know, a better climate would probably save them that way.
Do you find an impact of Christianity in Torudat's writings?
She, I mean, there is that kind of, you know, impact on her, and it also shows, not in the legends, you know, that the particular text that we are talking about here, but these could be, because she was writing them, you know, after 1870s, this could be a kind of a journey that she has taken from Christianity to understand Hinduism that way, you know.
Yeah, actually even in these poems, there is evidence of Christian values. For example, these lines from Bhattu. For this said Dronacharya, fame shall sound thy praise from sea to sea, and man shall ever link thy name with self-help, truth and modesty. Now, self-help, truth and modesty are Christian values that she is actually attributing to Ekalavya, attributes which she has got from her Christian upbringing. So, there is a subtle way in which she is trying to bring in Christian values, and when one talks about them as Christian values, one is talking about them as Christian values of charity, Christian values of brotherhood, and all of those are woven into the kinds of poems that she creates. So, it is one has to look at, when one looks at somebody like Torudat, one has to look at her as a very complex person trying to weave both values of Christianity and values of assertion as a woman, as a Christian, certain values that she gets. So, all of them together,
many things that are being brought together
to make the poems that she does. On the face of it, these are called ancient legends of Hindustan. Now, but here is the whole question of how a writer rewrites myths. It is predominantly Hindu myths that she is borrowing here in this particular book, but even as you try to create a poem of your own, you are actually trying to say that when I take a Hindu myth, when I take a Sita, when I take an Ekalavya's myth, I am able to create poems which are reminiscent of the old poems, but they are not old poems per se. When I write it as a Christian, when I write it as a woman, they have those identities stamped on them. That is what happens.
These are the poems that are written by the new woman, right?
Correct.
Which Kripabai Satyanathan also speaks about.
That is right.
The new woman who is English educated, who is also a Christian you know, convert, and who has got her enlightenment, the ideas of enlightenment, you know, into her life, you know, that have come in. And that is how so that poem Lotus also talks about enlightenment.
Correct.
Issues of Christianity in conversions. It's morely, I mean, it's more importance is given to the conversions here, the issue of conversions.
Actually, Lotus is a very good example, even in terms of questions that one talks about this writer as an Indian writer. Much has been written about this poem. Now, Lotus is a poem which arises out of a quarrel between the rose and the lily. Now, the rose and the lily are fighting amongst between themselves as to who should be the queen of the flowers. And then this quarrel is resolved towards the end of the poem with the lotus, I mean with the presentation of the figure of the lotus, which combines both the qualities of the rose as well as the lily. And lotus, as we know, as against rose and lily, is an Indian flower. So, from the English flowers which are quarreling here, you resolve the conflict by talking about an Indian flower which has the qualities of both. So, there is a kind of an assimilation of some of the qualities that you get from English education, from Western impact and colonialism, all of that. But once you are talking about it as a creation by an Indian writer, it is an Indian an Indian product.
What do you mean by this rewriting, sir? What do you mean by the rewriting?
No, when you the whole question of rewriting comes up in Torudat it comes up much later, much more forcefully among writers who are writing in the contemporary times, where a writer picks up an older theme, an older myth, but revisions it in such a way that it contemporizes that myth. That is what happens with Sita. Now, the Sita that we find in Torudat's poem is not the Sita of Ramayana, is not the Sita that Valmiki has created, it is the Sita that Torudat has created. Now, similarly, it is the story of Ekalavya that Torudat is creating. So, in a certain sense, it reminds us of the old legend, old myth, but it is a rewriting. It is a rewriting precisely because the writer brings her own individuality, her own identity to bear on these old myths.
Yeah.
That is how they become.
So, something as
questions
the
of
word
rewriting.
goes, actually something that has already been written
Yes.
is rewritten.
Yes.
Right. For example, I mean, continuing with the argument that Professor Sridhar has given, the poem Savitri that she has written.
Yes.
Right? She has written it, Aurobindo has written it. There are so many people who have written about Savitri, but in different ways.
The perception differs.
People write about Sita in different ways.
Okay.
Okay. So, that is what rewriting is. But here I think I want to add on to this rewriting thing
Yes.
by saying that women were rewriting themselves. They were written in a certain way,
Yes.
okay, by the men.
They were written about
by
in a certain
written about in a certain way.
Yes.
They were made in a certain
Yeah.
way, and they were rewriting themselves.
Yeah, they are not just rewriting myths, but they are also,
They were also
rewriting,
rewriting
themselves.
So
And,
that word rewriting
Correct.
means a lot for, especially for the women.
for the
writers.
women.
That's right.
How
That's
do
what
the texts are rewritten? I mean, how do as such the text itself is rewritten? Can you just throw more light on that, any of you?
Well,
And what do they rewrite actually?
no, I think we have spent some time about rewriting. Basically, what happens when a writer picks up an older theme or an older myth. Now, obviously, the story of Ekalavya is a story of a man who has learnt something by himself. A person who is made a self-made person.
Self-made, yeah.
Now, a self-made person is picked up even though he is male. Now, when Torudat is picking up that person who is a self-made person, now the choice of this person who is self-made is very, very important. Ekalavya is somebody who has had problems of not being accepted by Drona, his own teacher. Now, here is an instance where the writer is trying to pick up a theme which suits her women's sensibility, writing herself and making something of her own. That is what Ekalavya stands for her. A woman is a self-made person in the way Torudat looks at her.
Okay.
If you want to actually look at this word, and I mean, if you want to understand this rewriting in one
This perception.
yeah, what do you think of, who do you think Sita and Savitri are? How do you perceive them? You perceive them as pativratas.
Correct.
Okay. When these women writers or anybody who rewrites Sita and Savitri, they are not shown as pativratas any longer. A pativrata who is also a woman who is rebelled, probably. So, that is rewriting of the story of Sita. As you understand Sita, Sita is a pativrata, and you have to be like Sita, you have to be like Savitri, you have to be like so and so.
An ideal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, when you rewrite yourself in the in the way that these new women were writing, or we are writing right now, or we are reading,
Yeah.
we write them with with an understanding that we have of ourselves. So, we don't talk of them as somebody who just sacrifices the self. We talk of them as somebody who can sacrifice and who also has the grit to rebel and take care of oneself and write oneself.
Yeah.
And assert oneself, that is rewriting.
Yeah.
Basically, you read the story in a different way and you write it in a different way that suits that kind of development or progress of the woman,
Yeah.
or the man, whoever rewrites it.
Yeah. I think that's what happens even with the Savitri that you are
Yeah.
talking about. It's not the Sati Savitri that she is trying to revive. It's a Savitri who has that courage to bring back
strength in her to bring back her husband.
bring back her husband to life. Now, it is the strength of the woman that is being projected here, not the questions of chastity, questions of
It's
sacrifice.
almost as simple as man who provides life to the woman,
Correct.
but it's woman who gives life to the man.
That's right.
So,
that is right.
I mean, kind of. I mean, this is a very shallow way of putting it, but that's how you understand the word rewriting. That.
Yes, yes.
How do we look upon this text as examples of Indian writing in English?
You want to begin?
So, please go on.
Yeah. Now, how do we look upon these texts as examples of Indian writing in English? Now, the whole category of what we call now as Indian writing in English has to be looked at as Indian writing and Indian writing in English. Now, when we say Indian writing in English, now the lessons that all of you read in this course have texts which are written originally in English. There are also a number of texts which are translations from other Indian languages, not necessarily English alone. Now, that makes the course a little more complex, because we are not by saying that it is a course on Indian writing in English, we are saying that these will not have this course will not have texts written not only originally in English, but also texts in translation. Now, the other part of the title of this course is Indian. Now, what do we mean by Indian? Now, that also complicates the question of Indian writing in English, because the moment we talk about India, one is also talking about India as an imagined nation, and a nation which is being imagined at the time when some of these texts were being written, whether it is the Torudat's poems that we are talking about, whether it is Saguna, Kripabai Satyanathan Saguna that we are talking about. These texts are being written at a time when questions of the nation were also being thought about by India. So, questions of what constitutes India, how India is being imagined, are questions that some of these texts deal with. Now, if you look at the two texts which come later, Lihaf by Ismat Chugtai or Kamala Das's My Story, they are written in the early part of the 20th century, again at a time when questions of the nation are being talked about. The fight for Indian independence was becoming much more, I mean the fight is becoming much more active. Now, one talks about the earliest period of talking about the questions of the nation, let us say 1857, the first war of Indian independence. Now, the text that we have here straddle between that period of 1857 and after, I mean we have won freedom. So, these are texts which this is a course that talks about texts which are Indian, precisely because they are being written at a time when questions of the nation and how we imagine India is also being thought about.
In Saguna, we see about the historical documentation as well as personal and communal.
Correct.
How Kripabai has given such type of insights to that novel? Any?
Well, the main question that Saguna talks about is the questions of women's education and the question of Christianity. Now, when Christianity came to India, it's a religion which was of course accepted by of course the Dalits and other underprivileged people, precisely because they felt these people felt excommunicated. But on the other hand, Christianity was also being embraced by people who are from upper classes and upper castes. Now, when these people actually converted themselves, they experienced a different kind of excommunication. They were excommunicated precisely because they became Christians. So, conversion for these people meant that when they converted, they would not be looked upon as Indians, precisely because they have moved away from Hinduism. There India is being looked upon or understood only as India is equal to Hinduism. So, in a certain sense, Saguna is a very good example which interrogates these questions of what it is to become a Christian and what it is to become a Christian at a time when India was being imagined politically in terms of a nation.
Yeah.
So, isn't it very interesting that's happening in this text, Saguna? You're talking about Christianity and Hinduism. I mean, how the Hindus converted to Christianity and excommunicated, excommunication happens and then they come down that level.
Yes.
And you already have the Dalits who are untouchables, who have been excommunicated by the society.
Yes.
So, somewhere religion and caste,
yes,
you know,
they are intermingled.
They are intermingled.
Yes.
So, you bring caste into religion.
Yes.
You infuse caste into religion.
Yeah.
And you make it a very hierarchical, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Upper, middle,
correct,
lower middle, lower, lowest, you know, it's like this.
And religious freedom itself is a question there, and issue of gender also, as you said, it's a hierarchy, the first upper level, middle level and the lower level. So, how do you see that as a part of, is it an issue of gender when you categorize that?
See, when you are categorizing in every category, there is an issue of gender. Gender seeps into all categories, right? So, Saguna also was dealing with the gender issue all the time, because it is very clearly written in her text, you know, through examples. Like when she is pretty well educated and she is looking for suitable matches to get married. Obviously, women have to get married because that's what they were getting educated for, to become good wives, good women.
They are trained for that. That is what she says.
Even education is given to them so that they can they become good mothers, good wives, etc.
So, what were they being actually taught? Okay,
to fit in that social order,
so
especially for that.
There are two people who come there to propose to her. One is a barrister returned from England, and there's another doctor who comes, and they're all, she says, very queer, very strange people, weird people, who have forgotten what home is, who talk about England as home, and who talk about the other country as home. So, you have that kind of gender thing. They don't want to look at Saguna as a woman who is educated, who is worth anything.
Yes.
So, actually Saguna takes an upper position and tells those men that they are good for nothing.
Correct.
It almost comes out in that, in those passages when she speaks to these men.
The gender question also comes up in a different way, isn't it? When Saguna's father,
that is a very important
Harishchandra converts into Christianity, and the woman has absolutely no role in either saying yes or no. And you talked about Torudat's whole family.
Isn't it in Saguna, sir, that she bundles up all the jewelry and throws it at the husband's thing and says, I have nothing to do with,
Yes.
So, she asserts herself over there because she is not given a say, a voice in the conversion.
Yes.
And she doesn't want to convert. She wants to stay where she is.
Yes.
So, she is being given no choice at all. Either you have to terminate your marriage, which is a very bad thing for a woman in the Indian society, or you have to convert to a Christian and live with your husband.
Yeah, but there is also
image, that's the image that they gave for the women in that particular scenario.
See, the women also, some of the women who do not accept conversion the way it has come to them from men, also try to keep images of Hindu gods in their private rooms. Now, that is one way of by which a woman is rebelling against her being forced to accept a religion, not that she is against conversion altogether, but she is against the kind of conversion which is basically something that where a decision has been taken by man, and she has to simply accept it. And because she accepts it, she also can rebel against it by worshipping images of Hindu gods.
That act of of rebellion is
That
an act of rebellion against patriarchy.
That's right.
Where the
So that is where the
identity.
gender question comes up, where she is asserting herself as a woman who has a right to her own ways of worshipping gods. I think that there's a call.
They got a call. Hello. Hello.
Okay.
Hello.
హలో మేడం అది మా ఆంధ్రప్రదేశ్ డిస్ట్రిక్ట్ మేడం రవికుమార్ మాట్లాడు
చెప్పండి రవికుమార్ గారు.
మేడం యాక్చువల్గా మాకు అంబేద్కర్లోనే పీజీ కంప్లీట్ అయిపోయింది.
ఓకే.
బట్ పిహెచ్డి కంప్లీట్ అయిపోయింది కానీ బట్ అయితే మాకు సబ్జెక్ట్ మీద గ్రిప్ తెచ్చుకోలేకపోతున్నాము.
ఓకే.
అలాగే స్పోకెన్ ఫార్మ్ కూడా మేము గ్రిప్ తెచ్చుకోలేకపోతున్నాము.
ఓకే.
దానిపై డిస్టెన్స్ చేసిన వాళ్ళు మేము కొద్దిగా అంటే ఏదైనా కాలేజ్కి వెళ్ళినా కూడా వాళ్ళు యాక్సెప్ట్ చేయలేకపోతారు మమ్మల్ని.
ఓకే.
ఒక ఫ్యాకల్టీ వెళ్ళాలంటే మేము ఎలాగా
Yeah, this is a question which is related to the institution, not with the topic. Now we are discussing about Indian writing in English, some women writers. Let us come back to the discussion here. We are speaking about Kamala Das, Toru Dutt and Anita Desai in particular. Professor Sridhar?
Not Anita Desai, right? We are talking about the early writers.
The
We are
early
talking about
writers, Toru Dutt,
Kripabai
Kripabai
Satyanardan.
Satyanardan, Kamala Das.
Kamala Das and Ismat Chugtai.
Ismat Chugtai, okay.
Yes.
Let us come back to this. What are the women's issues that the text deal with?
What are the?
Women issues that the text deal with.
Yeah, I think we have already spent some time on the question of the women's issues that the text deal with. Maybe we could move on to the I mean, we have also talked a lot about Kripabai Satyanardan and Toru Dutt. Maybe if we look at specifically women's issues, maybe one should talk about Ismat Chugtai's Lihaf. Now, Lihaf is an excellent example of a text which talks about women's issues frontally, because here is a situation where you have a young adolescent girl who is experiencing her life as a woman, as a person who is going to become a woman in a certain way, and how she sees this relationship that is that's built up between her mother's foster sister and her servant Rabu. Now, the situation that is built up through the story is that of a relationship between two women bonding, and how a young adolescent girl reacts to the relationship that is built up through the story between these two characters.
See,
perhaps Vidya has something to.
This is, see, we've been talking about women's identity. Okay, when we spoke about the two writers Satyanardan and Toru Dutt, we are talking about a kind of identity they were making for themselves, without probably bringing body too much into the picture. Okay, woman's sexuality, which forms a part of her identity, is something that most of the people do not accept or do not talk about. So,
Their
when you come to the later
yeah.
writers, these two writers that we are talking about right now, Ismat Chugtai as well as Kamala Das,
Yeah.
these are the ones who have brought in this issue of sexuality
The body
into
and
the
its
forefront.
Yes.
Yeah, and this whole debate about the question of obscenity.
Yeah.
What constitutes
So,
obscenity?
the moment woman becomes, because woman was supposed to be an asexual creature, she was supposed to be a creature who existed only at the level of an idea, at the level of the mind, at the level of spirituality, and that's how probably, I mean, I don't know, this is probably far-fetching, but then the Bharata Mata, that picture that was made by Abanindranath Tagore, also is a woman who is covered up in that yellow robe from head to
toe.
toe.
Yeah.
So, she wasn't supposed to show anything of herself.
Yes.
which later when you're making that Bharat Mata, Hussein
Yeah.
makes a nude woman.
Yes.
See, look at the progress of
That's
this entire idea of who a woman is, what a
Yeah.
woman is.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
there is a
So-
phone
Yeah.
call.
Hello.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, madam.
Yeah, good afternoon.
I am Nirmala from Godavari, working as a junior lecturer
Yes.
in English. So just I want to know why should we talk about the religion of the Saruda? If she writes something about the lotus, so you are just talking about her conversion into Christianity. So I think why it is necessary to talk about the Christianity? We should why should we not discuss about her writings?
Okay.
Yes,
Can
Professor Sridhar.
Yeah. See, when we talk about lotus, we are not talking about Christianity as religion. Now, Christianity is a religion which has come to India as a Western religion. The Western religion also brings along with it certain values, certain ways of certain ways of values of life being inculcated through it,
symbols.
and the culture and westernization as a cultural symbol. Now, even when you talk about the question of the lotus of course is an Indian symbol. Now, that is where we are saying that even as she picks up the quarrel between rose and the lily, which are Western flowers, and the quarrel between them, the resolution is brought out by the symbol of the lotus, which represents an Indian nation. So, that is how one will have to look at a poem like Lotus. I hope I have been able to answer your question.
Yes. Let us continue the topic.
Yeah, we were talking about the sexuality and the
Sexuality,
issue
yes.
that Isma Chugtai
About the
brings up in
body
her.
and its experiences that has been reflected in the
Yeah,
works of
it's not
Isma.
talked about.
Yes.
In a heterosexual society and in a patriarchal setup, woman is not supposed to talk about herself at all, and especially her desire, her sexuality and all these issues. So, Chugtai brings up this issue, and she not only talks about sexuality, but she talks about lesbianism, okay, and lesbianism as a rebellion against the heterosexual behavior, or the husband who takes on to the Nawab who takes
Correct.
on to homosexuality and marries the woman and is punishing the woman, but doesn't care about it at all, because for the society he has to be a married man. So, he does something for the society and he does something for himself.
So, this is
So-
speaking about double standards, and she is going to put up that in front of.
She doesn't do
she's-
anything. She is somebody who looks at it for years and suddenly and finally decides that she is going to live her life, or she is going to make her partner a servant girl who is working for her. It doesn't matter if the servant girl has the small pox,
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't matter whether the woman is black or whether the woman comes from a lower strata of the society, even though there is that caste issue and there is that hierarchy over there too in their relationship, still she goes on to this. So, it's a kind of a rebellion against, the man's world there. It's a choice that she makes. I suppose Isma Chugtai,
No, I thought since you talked about the Nawab, I thought something here
We can
would
read
be
about
interesting.
it, yeah.
Now, this is what Ismat Chugtai says about the Nawab. The Nawab Saheb had only contempt for such disgusting sports, which other people were indulging in. He kept an open house for students, young, fair, slender-waisted boys whose expenses were borne by him. And she follows by saying, having married Begum Jan, he tucked her away in the house with his other possessions and promptly forgot her. The frail, beautiful Begum wasted away in anguished loneliness. Now, that is the figure of Begum Jan that we have, and that is the figure of Nawab. Now, the Nawab marries for the sake of
Society.
pretense, has a kind of a heterosexual relationship with this woman, and that stops with having married her. But what Isma Chugtai says is that he conveniently tucks her away in the house with his other possessions. So, she is for him she is a possession which can be simply kept away.
It's
And
a shelved,
it is
shelved possession.
Yeah, that being shelved like that is what Begum Jahan is trying to come out from. She is trying to assert herself from that kind of
So,
position.
the quilt covers and uncovers.
Uncovers, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
somebody is trying to cover something with the quilt,
Same time it is getting
and
out.
that quilt is taken away in order to uncover something.
that.
It's a very beautiful story,
Yes,
actually.
yeah. In fact, the collection of stories called the lifting the veil,
yeah.
which is a selection of Ismat Chughtai stories, which is published more recently. The title is very symbolic, lifting the veil. Now, that is immediately, I mean, it connects us to the question of the quilt, the image of the quilt, and the question of covering and uncovering, which the quilt very effectively does in this story.
How do we compare my story with the other writers, Kamala Das's My Story, with the other women writers, because it plays a prominent role. As you said, it is about the understanding the body and the experiences of the body, and it's giving a very different view altogether. Can you just
Kamala Das writes about sexuality, that's what I said, but when you are talking about My Story, you are talking about Kamala Das's autobiography,
Yes.
let's say, in
Yes.
quotes.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And when you are talking about Kripabai Satyanathan's Saguna, you are again talking about an autobiographical novel. Okay. So, the questions that My Story raises are very important for us about the genre of autobiography.
Correct.
Where is it a story, is it a novel, is it an autobiography, where exactly does that My Story stand? What is the
frame
story?
in
If
which
it's a story,
place we
yeah,
are going to
it's
frame
fiction.
it? Okay.
So, it's some details of her life which are given to us along with a lot of things that she supposes they're like. So, it's fiction, all right. So, it can also be an autobiographical novel.
Correct.
For all I know, I mean, for all I understand.
Yeah,
Professor Sridhar can speak about
it is
it.
precisely an autobiography which is written in the form of fiction, and definitely what connects this with Ismat Chughtai and the other earlier women writers is the fact that when you come to Kamala Das, there is an open assertion of woman's sexuality. This becomes very clear in the entire autobiographical genre, in which, I mean, as Vidya was trying to say, it's very difficult to categorize this as a whether it's an episodic novel, because My Story has been published in for a journal, each time one episode coming in, and therefore each episode is full in itself, complete in itself, but leads on to the next, because when a writer publishes it in the form of an episodic narrative, then each episode must be complete in itself, leading on to the other. And then the story of Kamala Das, who is the protagonist in a certain sense of this story, a Nair upper caste women, her desires, her being the way she has been treated by her husband, who has this habit of looking into her private diaries, reads from them, and how she rebels against that kind of treatment, and her open relationships with other men in her life, and her willingness to talk about it openly in My Story.
And how are they all related is they're all trying to assert themselves.
Yes.
They're all trying to assert themselves.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So they're all women writers in a league. I mean, in India, we are talking about Indian writing.
Early Indian women writers.
These are all women who were
trying to see them.
Yeah,
Though it is gentle
in different ways.
Yeah, though they are gentle, but they are assertive about their works. Of course, gentle can always be interpreted. Thanks.
Maybe you would want to say something about Thorudat and her being how she is looked upon by Goss. In terms of
right now we have 2 minutes running out of time. So I thank Professor Sridhar and ma'am for this good insights been given. And as you said, Thorudat Krupabai, Ismat Chugta and Kamla Das. They are, as you, we gave different examples from their poetry and from the fiction. And there are lot of information that we get from these women about the self-identity, self-search, about the patriarchy, the values that they stand for. And as we go from one work to the other work, we see that there is a chronological, though it is not a chronologically ordered, order is there, but still there is an a fabrication and interconnectivity. Thank you very much for being with us in the studios, and I thank Professor Sridhar and ma'am from Central University for being with us for this 1 hour. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.